Well, today's topic is something that I'm super excited about because it is something that everybody's trying to navigate, I think, and it's the ethical adoption of AI in your organization. And I'm super excited to have Dr. Ernest Wayde with me today. He's the founder and principal of Wayde AI, helping healthcare organizations and clinical leaders navigate the ethical integration of artificial intelligence. He serves on the American Board of Professional Psychology's AI Task Force and contributed to the American Psychological Association's Health Advisory on generative AI in mental health applications. Specializing in responsible AI implementation, Dr. Wayde helps organizations develop AI strategies that support human expertise while aligning with clinical values, regulatory standards, and patient well being. He also co produces the podcast Beyond the Couch AI and Psychology, exploring AI's role in mental health practice. Dr. Wayde holds a doctorate in clinical and cognitive psychology, a master's degree in information systems, and advanced AI certifications from MIT Sloan and Microsoft. So, Ernest, thank you so much for joining me today. This is going to be a fun conversation, I think.
Yeah, Chris, thanks for having me. I'm always happy to talk about AI.
Well, we were just talking before we started, just, we're seeing different things right out in the world.
Mhm.
And so before we jump into it too much, as far as like what you're seeing or best practices that we'll talk about, what led you to begin this journey into the topic of really integrating AI into organizations?
Yeah, that's a really great question. And actually, my journey is a little bit different because I actually started off in the technology space. I started off in computer science and was always interested in AI. And it's one of those things where I thought way back when AI, before even AI was popular, I always thought I was going to be the one who invented AI that everybody would use. And so I thought, if you're going to build a machine that can think and reason like a human being, you really need to understand how human beings think and reason. And psychology is a study of that. So uh, since since college, I've always had an interest in and pursued both psychology and computer science, specifically AI. But as I got more and more experiences, and as ChatGPT came about, it became something that I noticed that it wasn't really a technology question. We talk about AI and we talk about all the technology, but really when we're talking about AI and technology, we're talking about leadership. We're talking about integrating into the organizations. We're talking about people,
Mhm.
right? Because even with AI being a technology, people have to use it, and organizations are made up of people that are impacted by AI and that are being asked to use AI. So that really sort of was a great opportunity for me to blend my experience and my love of both AI and working with people together, and that's kind of how I started working at this bridge between AI and organizations.
Well, it's interesting you say that because really the general population probably really got introduced to it when ChatGPT launched, what, in 2022, late 2022.
Yeah.
And it's like now it's such a hot topic, and there's so much more to it than ChatGPT or Claude or all the
Mhm.
Perplexity and all the different tools. There's so many tools now, right? And there's so many platforms that are building on those tools. And so, when you talk about ethical adoption of AI, how do you define that? And what does that look like?
Yeah, so for me, when I talk about AI, I love AI and I want to be transparent. I love AI, I use it all the time in everything that I do, but I always advocate for its ethical and responsible use, right? So when we're talking about ethical AI adoption, we're really talking about making sure that it aligns with things like human values, then our professional responsibilities, and then our organizational accountability, right? So it goes in from you as a person to your profession to your organization. So I tend to distinguish between AI ethics and responsible AI adoption as two separate things. So when we talk about ethics, we're really asking, what should we do? What should we do? What's important to us? What's valuable? And when we're talking about responsible adoption, we're asking how. How do we actually build those practices, those policies, and that oversight and governance to make sure that things are being right and consistently? So when we talk about ethical adoption, we want to ask things like, be clear about what the technology can and can't do. Because AI is great. I love it, but it can only do certain things. There's things that it cannot do or things that it can do, but not well. And so being
Mhm.
mindful of that distinction and making sure that we're keeping humans at the forefront in terms of accountability and decisions. If you have an AI application and it does something wrong, you, the user, are still ultimately accountable and responsible. You can't blame AI for it. There's been so many things in the news about how people have used AI to write reports in legal cases and consulting and in various situations And when they're found out, they are held accountable, right? You can't say, well, my tool got it wrong. You have to be accountable. So making sure that we're thinking about those things when we're thinking about ethics of AI. So really when I think about, in broad terms, ethical adoption is really not just about having good intentions, right? It's about building the structure, the framework, and making sure that everybody's on the same page when it comes to making sure that we're being responsible in how we think about AI and how we deploy and use AI.
Well, it's interesting you say that because, I was listening to some things recently and how really what AI does is it amplifies the human thinking or processes or procedures when you think about it, right? Like it's garbage in, garbage out. If I give bad prompts and then I get mad that the output isn't great, well, guess what?
Mhm.
Who's at fault? AI or me? And so I think a lot of it comes down to, and I was even telling you before we started recording just how I saw a training yesterday, how the presenter was talking about if you don't have good processes and procedures, if you haven't documented things well, if you don't really
Mhm.
know what you're doing well, and then you try to get AI to do those things, well, guess what? You're going to have an amplified automated mess if you
Mhm.
don't implement it wisely. So, like you're saying, keeping the human element involved and making sure that people are behind this, making sure what's coming out and what is actually being presented beyond just what the AI output is seems really important.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think this is where I always advocate for literacy when it comes to AI. People need to understand how these applications and tools are developed and trained, right? They're developed and trained on large amounts of data. You could say almost the whole internet. But we know that not everything in the internet is accurate, right? Or appropriate. And so these models consist of all this information that has not been validated or reviewed necessarily from the internet. And so they're going to have things in there. And on top of which, there's a lot of data that we have that includes biases and errors, and all that is baked into the AI, right? So if there's a bias that is inherent in the data that was used to train the AI application is going to have bias inherently. But the AI
Mhm.
application doesn't know that. It doesn't know that this information is biased. The way AIs respond, large language models specifically, is they are predicting the next word in the sequence.
Mm.
They're not judging whether it's right or wrong. They're just predicting the next likely word in the sequence. And when they create an output, what they're presenting to you is what they believe is the most likely response that you ask for whatever it is that you ask for. They make no judgment on it. They make no claims of accuracy or whatever. And so when people say AI is hallucinating, this really bugs me because hallucinating refers to humans, right? Humans hallucinate. AI does
Mhm.
not hallucinate. It predicts the next word and presents you with an output. It's your responsibility as a human to determine if that's accurate or not. And so by ascribing hallucination to the AI, you're thinking of it as a human, and then you start to ascribe the human determination of right and wrong and accuracy or not. That's not AI. AI is a tool. It's just giving you an output. You as the humans are still responsible for determining if it's accurate and appropriate.
What's interesting, I was even doing some work today on an idea that I had this morning, and I was working through it on my ChatGPT chat, and I got to a certain point, and I said, "Okay, don't be nice because it tends to be very affirmative, right?" And I said, "Don't be nice. Give me the hard truth. Is this a viable idea based on what you know in my region? Blah blah blah." Right? I started to give it
Mhm.
some prompts about evaluating this idea. And it flipped on me because it had been affirming everything I'd been giving it up until that point. And then it
Yeah.
said, yeah, this is the right question to ask because here are the challenges with that. So, to your point, if we just take it at face value and we don't think about it and we don't really question even what the outputs are and consider why that's giving us those outputs. I also heard somebody say the other day that if it's scraping the internet from all this data that's out there and humans have put that data out there,
Mhm.
you can't blame the AI. It's like if it's a bad if it's bad information, it's human information that it's
Yeah.
basically gathered, right?
This is where the term garbage in, garbage out is really very, very powerful here, right? Because what we put into the AI will determine what we get out of the AI, along with the kind of prompt that you write,
Mhm.
along with how the AI has been trained, the algorithm that was used to train it. This is one of the things that's really interesting about large language models is if you put a prompt in twice, you're not likely to get the exact same response because they're actually built to give you some variance because they're built to try to be like humans. And generally, when you ask a human a question twice, you're going to get a slightly different response. And so they're going to give you the variations in the responses that they give. And there's so many things, including the time of day, the power that's available, the kind of prompt that you write. Who else is using the system? There's so many things that impact how a large language model responds. On top of the fact that, the data that was used to train it impacts the kind of response that you're going to get. So I think this way we need to be very careful with these tools. And again, I love them. I use them all the time. But to your point, they can also be very affirming. AI is built to affirm. It's built to, tell you that you are the best at everything and that all your ideas are great. They're built to try to please you, but they also do that in a very lazy way. So keeping in mind that it will try to please you, but it will take shortcuts, including making stuff up, telling you things that are inaccurate or untruth. And it doesn't really care. It just wants you to feel good about yourself.
So, with that being said, I think this next question is really important for everybody. So, what are the primary challenges of navigating AI in organizations today, or what do leaders most often misunderstand about this AI adoption?
hmm Yeah, so this is a really great question because I think there is a real challenge right now for leaders, for organizational leaders. I think for me, the biggest challenge is that AI is moving very fast in most organizations, but it's also doing so very quietly, right? No, there's AI. I would wager that every organization has at least somebody who's using AI, but that's not necessarily clear, right? They don't put up their hand and say, "Oh, I'm using AI, and when I do this or that or this," and so the organization doesn't have that full transparency into who's using AI or how it's impacting their outcome, right? Let's say I'm an organization and I'm asked to do something, and AI can help me do it faster, and so I do it. But AI also suggests some approaches, some things that I include in this output that I give. I sip the output out, but no, I haven't told anyone that I've used AI. And now AI is influencing what I have done and how other people are seeing and doing things, but they don't know that, right? And so AI is very quickly getting embedded into organizations in a very quiet way, which can be very dangerous because then you don't have full transparency into the influence that AI is having into your organization. So leaders are feeling very pressured to adopt AI quickly, but they don't have the necessary literacy because they don't understand how it works, what it's doing, how it's being embedded into their organization. And so there's a lot of challenges for organization and for leaders that I think they have to face. I always say one of the things that you want to do is start with governance. And really that starts with just let's take a look at our organization. Let's see where we know AI is. Let's take a look at where we think AI might be, and let's take a look and see where others might be using AI but aren't being transparent about it, right? Just start with that full global view as a leader to try to get a better sense of where AI is in your organization, what it's actually doing, where it's appropriate, where it's not, where you might have bias or things like that you need to be checking for in terms of accuracy, hallucinations, and so on and so forth.
Well, I like what you're saying because even before we started recording, and I was like, we got to start recording this because we're already talking about it, right? Is that
hmm
AI is influencing every organization, whether the leaders know it or not, to your point, because people are using it. So
Yeah.
whether it's formalized or informal, people are utilizing the tools out there, and that's one of the to me that seems like one of the challenges because I was telling you that when I talk to a lot of leaders in our area in particular, I
hmm
don't see a lot of official adoption
hmm
and with AI. I don't see a lot of people talking about policies and governance that you're saying. I
Yeah.
see people using ChatGPT or Claude or Perplexity type tools for writing, for organizing thoughts, putting plans together, that type of thing, but
hmm
not necessarily in their systems and processes to automate things necessarily. So, with all that being said, what are you seeing? And you mentioned the governance piece already, but what does it look like when leaders, organizations are actually approaching AI adoption well?
Yeah, so this is another great question because what you see a lot of right now in the field is that people are rushing, right? People are rushing to adopt AI. They want to use AI, but really the ones that are doing it well aren't necessarily rushing or using a lot of AI. They're really taking a step back and are asking better questions before adoption, right? So
Mhm.
they're starting with, well, what's the problem that we're trying to fix? Not oh, AI is here, we got to use AI. They're taking a step back and say, well, what problem are we trying to fix? Because what you also see a lot of is there's a quick adoption of AI, but you haven't thought it through. And so you're not actually seeing the value that you were hoping for because you haven't identified the problem that you're trying to fix. Right. So they're really starting back and saying, well, what's the problem? And is AI an appropriate tool? They're making sure that there's a full literacy that is a standard in the organization, not just the leaders and decision making, but the organization, the people that are going to use it as well need to have a certain level of literacy so that they can know when it's appropriate to use it and what the risks are associated with it. You want to make sure that people are using it safely. So they're taking a step back and they're defining we can use AI for a lot of things, but what do we as an organization determine where it's appropriate and acceptable versus inappropriate and unacceptable, right? AI can do a lot of things, but that doesn't mean it should. And so you need to really make sure you're taking the step back to think it through. And all of this, what you're doing here is you're mitigating risk, right? You're mitigating the risk that comes with AI because there's a lot of value with AI, but there's also a lot of risk with AI. And so these kind of questions, taking the step back and asking these questions before you even get to adoption, before you even selecting the tool. So tool selection is the easy part, right? It's really making sure that this is the appropriate tool. It's going to be used safely and appropriately and give you the value that you're hoping for when you're selecting this tool. So that's what I see a lot of in terms of when you do it right, is take the step back and ask the right questions before you jump in.
It's interesting you say that because as you're talking about that, I think about the image of just going to like Home Depot or Lowe's, and you
Hmm.
just go in and there's thousands of tools you can buy. And if
Yeah,
you just walked in and just started grabbing things off the shelf without thinking about why are you there?
yeah,
What do I need? If maybe I don't need a shovel, but I bought one, right? Like what maybe I don't need a hammer, but I bought one.
yeah.
That's kind of what I've seen with people is I've seen some friends of mine actually get very enamored with AI very
Hmm.
quickly and they just think it's neat and they think it's awesome. And then I'll ask them like, well, why are you subscribing to that tool? Why are you even paying for that? And they're like, because it's cool. And I'm like, that is not a good answer for your business. It's like there's lots of cool things in society and in the world that, but doesn't mean like to your point, doesn't mean you have to have it. And in fact, I was talking to a friend of mine yesterday. I was like, you need to quit subscribing to that thing that you never
Yeah,
use, but you've been paying for it for months because you thought it was neat a year ago, right? Like, and
yeah.
I feel like that's what's happening for a lot of people. And then leaders can easily fall into that trap. And I'm sure different businesses of different sizes probably fall into this as a trap as well, or
Hmm.
like you said, what they need to step back and just because one organization that they know or somebody they know does something doesn't mean that it's the right thing for their company and team.
Yeah, yeah.
So there's a three-part framework that you utilize in your practice. Why don't you tell us about that?
Yeah, so when I work with clients or even when I speak in general, I like to take a very systematic approach because people usually want to jump in and go to help us implement something. And I have to take it back and say, well, let's start with education, right? I want to make sure that you understand what AI is, how it works, the pros, the cons. So that's just that basic AI literacy that I always like to start with, right? Because not everybody needs to become a technician or have that technical expertise. But if you're
Mhm.
going to use it, you're going to manage people or govern other people that are using it, you need to have a basic understanding in order to make good decisions about the use of AI, about when it's appropriate, when it's not. And so I really start there, making sure that we're clearly talking about what it does, how it works, the risks associated with it, all of those things. And then once we have that pretty well understood in terms of the leadership level and in the organization, then we start moving to, well, how does it fit into our organizational strategy, right? We start thinking about your AI strategy that fits into your overall business and organizational strategy.
Mhm.
It needs to be something that helps you be successful in your organization, not a distraction, because it can be a distraction as you talked about, right? And so we start thinking about what problems are we trying to solve and how could AI possibly help us with that, or what advantage could AI help us leverage, right? Really
Mhm.
being very strategic and thoughtful about that, and then also taking a step back in terms of thinking about what are the potential risks of introducing AI, because AI, if you think of AI as a tool, then you need change management because you can implement or introduce a tool, but nobody uses it. If you do that, you've wasted your money, and that happens a lot. That's not just AI. That's any technology, right? And so making sure that we're thinking through not just the technology, the tool, but the people associated with this. How are they going to react to this? How are they going to interact with this? There's been a lot of concern and fear in the workforce about AI replacing people. And so imagine if you show up to work one day and they say, hey, you don't have to do X, Y, and Z anymore. We have AI to do that. How are you going to feel about that? And then
Hmm.
they say, we want you to use AI, like you're basically training your replacement. So a
Right.
lot of people have that sense of fear and concern. So it's really appropriate that the way in which you frame it and you deliver that news and get the best value for people, you have to think through it and be very strategic in your approach. And then the last step, when we've done all of this, is execution, right? What do we need in order to make sure that this is actually implemented and really start with piloting. Let's see how it goes, make some adjustments, make some tweaks, make sure we have governance in place, make sure we have policies written out, make sure that everybody understands how it impacts the workflow, how and when should it be used, how are we evaluating success versus failure, how are we monitoring for fairness, bias, all of these things that we want to make sure will lead to the best value for the organization and the best use of the AI application and the tool. And then after
Mhm.
that is monitoring, right? You want to constantly review and improve and monitor the process because AI is not static. Every so often, very quickly these days, every few months, there's a new AI model. And the new AI model is usually pretty different from the old model and will have different pros, but also different risks. And so you have to reevaluate, how does this model work for us? It's like a software update, right? Any software that comes out, you have to do a software analysis to determine how is this going to impact our current process, our current procedures, our current technologies before you implement that software update. And so same thing with AI and models. You have to constantly stay up to date with what's going on.
Yeah, and would you agree? I mean, I started thinking about this week. I feel like even though like ChatGPT has been out 4 or 5 years, more to the public and things gotten more popular, I feel like it doesn't feel new anymore. But then at the same time, I start talking to people and I'm like, we're really still at the very beginning of this journey in many ways. Is that accurate? Are you
Yeah, so
seeing?
you think about it, ChatGPT really came out in 2022, so not that long ago. I mean, like we're talking 4 years ago, but yet it's become so entrenched in our daily lives that for a lot of people, not for everybody, but for a lot of people, it's part of what you normally do and what you normally use. I know for me, I use it all the time. I use AI now instead of Google. I'll ask AI a question instead of going to Google because I like the way in which it responds.
Hmm.
And so a lot of people are beginning to find that it's becoming entrenched in our lives. Sometimes not in a way that you thought or that you expected. And so in some ways it's not new and it's become a part of who we are and what we do. But there are also constantly new updates on what it can do, right?
Hmm.
And the risks that are associated with the more it can do, right? And so we're also struggling with the lack of boundaries that have been determined for AI and what it should do, what it shouldn't do versus what it can and can't do. And then there's also that other layer of it does a lot of things well. It makes a lot of people's lives easy. And so how do you tell people not to use it if it makes their lives easier in certain ways and try to put boundaries around that, for
Hmm.
them as individuals, as organizations? And then there's also the legal and federal laws that are struggling to keep up, right? And so there's a
Hmm.
lot of layers associated with this. So and the end result for me is it's constantly, being updated, and so that makes it fresh and new. But in some ways, it's also become part of my daily approach, and so I don't really think of it as unique anymore. As like the internet or Google or whatever, so it's
Hmm.
become sort of part of the daily process. So it's a yes and no, right? In some
Right.
ways.
Well, that's just the thing. I think that's why I wanted to have this conversation because the more I'm reading, listening to people, and even thinking on my own about all this, there's so much to think about, and I think,
Mhm.
your son's in college, my son's in college, our kids that are going through school and, you know, the conversations around our house have been, back in the day when teachers didn't let kids use calculators
Yeah,
and all of a sudden they let them use calculators. So now can you use Chat GPT or not,
yeah,
and so there's all this tension around education and in the workforce and copyright laws and all these things and intellectual property and what makes it not yours or makes it yours. And
yeah.
I feel like this is going to be, we could have this conversation 6 months from now, a year from now, definitely 3 or 4 or 5 years from now. It's going to be a completely enhanced or different conversation to some level.
Yeah. To that point about education, I had a guest on my podcast recently who was an educational psychologist, and he was talking about how he's at a big university. He was talking about how sometimes, we say, well, we should teach you how to do something without AI because it might not be around and whatever. And he says, look at the calculator. When it first came out, to your point, people were saying, well, you got to learn how to do this because you won't always have a calculator. A calculator is ubiquitous now. It's everywhere. It's on your
Right.
phone. It's everywhere, and you can use it for anything that you want. And so his point was, instead of saying, well, you need to learn how to use it without AI, right? Let's figure out how you can use it and work together with AI. And
Yeah.
if the questions that we're asking you are too easy because you can do it really easily with AI, we need to learn to ask different questions. We
Mhm.
need to challenge your thinking so that when you're using AI, you still have to use your cognition, your thinking processes, and AI just helps to improve your response,
Mhm.
which is a really difficult thing for us, right? We now have to take a step back and say, we used to do things this way in education, we used to do these things this way in healthcare, we used to do things this way, and so on and so forth. Now we have AI. How do we do things differently? How does that impact how we do things differently and sort of redesign the whole process for education, healthcare, whatever the industry may
Mhm.
be, rather than just saying, well, here's how we do things. Let's try to fit AI in here and jam it in there, right? We really
Right.
need to take a step back and say, how is this going to make things different for us? And how can we take better advantage of this new tool, this new technology, also being mindful of where the risk and the boundaries are.
Yeah, that's really good because I think about it from, especially like our kids are going through school and then when they graduate, it's like there might be all these restrictions about what not you can't use for AI, right? And then all of a sudden you get out into the real world daily living in the business and life and you're using it all the time. It's like, so have we really prepared them to use the tools that are available, or did we just kind of resist and fight it, And so
Mhm.
to your point, it's like helping people understand how to appropriately use tools seems like part of this conversation of how do you implement that adoption? How do you make sure that you're utilizing things wisely, strategically, ethically? Who's the ethical standard even, right? Like what as a business,
Yeah.
that's what are your core values? What are your best practices and your operating standards? All these things that you need to already be establishing because
Hmm.
once again, AI is going to enhance, amplify, or cause problems if you don't use it the right way. So, Ernest, this has been great. I appreciate your time with this. How can people learn more about what you're doing and connect with you to hear more?
Yeah, I appreciate that. People can always get a hold of me through my website, wadeai.com. And then I'm also available on LinkedIn. I think email is also a good way, Ernest at wadeai.com. But we have a lot of things on social media as well. So
Mhm.
any of those are fine to reach out to us. I think the website, if you go to the website, all of those things are available on there. So that's probably the
Yeah.
best place to start is just go to
And,
wadeai.com.
and just to clarify, you primarily work with the healthcare side of things, or are you helping general businesses as well?
I primarily specialize in healthcare and behavioral health, but I also work with other industries as well. Just because of my background in healthcare
Yeah.
and mental health, that's kind of where I focus. But I'm happy to help anybody. If
Okay.
to me, I love learning new things, and so if somebody has an issue or a problem that I can help with, I'm happy to learn and do what I can.
Excellent. Well, that's great because I think you could be a good resource to a lot of different business leaders out there that are listening. So thank you once again for your time and definitely excited to kind of see where this goes. And I have a feeling this isn't the last conversation we're going to have about this.
Well, thanks for having me, Chris. I really appreciate the opportunity. I
Absolutely.
love
Well,
this
you take
conversation.
care.